Every neighborhood had a house like this, a dark, creaky, freaky house. This one stood on a hill overlooking the suburbs below. From a young age they were told not to go near it. Halloween, however, meant the rules didn't count, right? The lights from the town felt far away now, with the full moon lighting up the old house. This strange, compact, square house had been here as long as anyone in the town could remember. Never lit up, never decorated, never inhabited. A stark contrast between the nearby town with its modern homes and plentiful lighting, which Jack missed right now. "Come on, Jack! I dare you to knock!" Jack balled his fists, legs on either side of his bicycle. You know what? Yeah, he could do it. He peeked around the teens with him. 2 others had joined him in trick-and-treating, and they'd been very successful. Jack's own Elliot costume, complete with E.T. basket in the front, had been a hit, and it meant he didn't have to walk. He still couldn't believe how many of his friends had preferred staying at home, probably so Monday they could brag about imaginary parties they had attended. Out of town, of course. The bravest would probably try the pub only to be thrown out on their asses by the landlord. College was bad enough with all the extra work and a threat of A-levels looming over. No, Jack had just wanted a fun night with his mates. It would probably be their last one. Next year was their final year of college, and they'd be too busy to make costumes. He suddenly realized they were all still looking at him. They'd been for real. "Right, watch E.T. for me," he said airily as he kicked the kickstand and got off his bike. With a more nonchalant gesture than he felt, he pushed some of his curly hair out of his face. He could hear some nervous chuckling and whispering behind him as he walked the 5 steps to the massive front door. They'd better not take off without him. He had spent hours making that E.T. dummy. The whole costume had started as a joke, but he ended up taking it much too seriously. Something that happened to him all too often, it seemed. He glanced up at the imposing doorway, wondering if he should call the whole thing off or yell "boo" at his friends loudly and then run off while they chased him. His hands reached out for the knocker, and he could feel the chilly air now that he had taken his hands out of his parka pockets. It was cold, and it was getting darker by the minute. The handed-out candy would pretty soon diminish to nothing but sweet violets and Werthers. Before him the door remained unmoving, frozen. "Hurry up, you helmet!" Nicholas called out to him, and he sighed. Nicholas was the oldest, and he had vetoed his plan to try and go to the pub. Honestly, beyond Taynor, none of them were tall enough to get past for 18. "Fine, I'll knock, but then..." Turning around, he saw his friends were not looking at him. They were looking up, over his head, faces paling in fear. "You guys having a laugh?" His voice pitched up, and he took a few steps towards them, feet thudding down the stairs again. Whatever it was, he would not be able to see it from the doorstep. Clearly, it had spooked his friends, but he couldn't see it. All he noticed was the upstairs curtain moving softly. He shivered. "Are you smelling fries?" Nicholas asked, looking around in doubt. Jack took in a deep breath. "No, I'm smelling... fries?" Taynor let out the breath he had been holding and made them all jump. Jack could see Tay shiver, even inside the inflatable dinosaur costume. "Jeez," Nicholas sighed. "We probably should." "No, you still need to knock, Jack. What are you, chicken?" Jack made a face at his friends. It looked like he had almost gotten away with not knocking. But now that was back on the table. A gust of wind blew some dried leaves around his ankles. This house had no pumpkins or decorations, so perhaps they could just leave it be. "Fine, give me a minute, though you guys spooked the hell out of me." He flashed a grin and went to check on his E.T. dummy, while grabbing some of the candy that he had stashed in the basket. A full-sized Cadbury chomp was retrieved, and he peeled it leisurely, eating it bite by bite. The other kids grinned and followed his lead, looting their trick-or-treat buckets before discerning parents could throw out all the unhealthy but delicious bits. Much to everyone's envy, Tainor had gotten a Twix, which he was now sharing with Nicholas. Somehow, nobody seemed to want to address that the frying smell grew stronger. Maybe the kebab shop down the road? The fish and chips shop? Maybe. But one of those upscale ones then. It smelled more like a homemade fry-up than a chip shop. And to be honest, it was making Jack hungry. Okay, let's do this. Jack crumpled the paper and shoved it in his pants pocket. His parents had taught him not to litter, and it would be fairer to keep them so they could have more accurate count later on. Let's do this, he repeated, and smacked his hands together, glad for the sound. Nick, you got my bike, okay? Like, if you die? No, you absolute numpty, in case we need to run, Jack clarified. You're not getting my bike. Oh. Nick seemed slightly disappointed, but mounted the bike, ready to slam the kickstand and go. Ready when you are. Cheers. He took in a deep breath and grinned. Okay, this was probably not going to be anything. He was going to knock, nothing was going to answer. He visualized it like his mother often told him to do. First, I'm going to knock twice on that ancient wooden door. It'll ring out all loud and creepy like. Nothing's going to happen. The smell of the fry-up isn't strange. We're going to laugh, run off, and then get more candy. He reminded himself that the lack of decorations probably meant nobody was living here, and if they were, they wouldn't open up for trick-or-treaters. And with that, he wondered why he was even afraid of it in the first place. He shook loose some of the tension in his arms and mounted the steps again to the front door. This time it seemed less imposing at least. He chuckled and turned to his friends, though he was displeased to find the smell of frying meat was increasing as he stepped ever closer. He raised his hand up. Boo! Shouted Nicholas, before laughing. Jack couldn't help himself. He laughed as well, and turned around with his hands up as if he was impersonating a monster. He barely remembered the commotion around the window anymore, probably for the best. This time, Tainor shrieked. He started to run, while Nicholas just looked confused. The smell of fried chicken was overpowering now, and against Jack's best instincts, he turned around. The door was open, more than ajar. The first thing he noticed was the smell of rot, dark and damp, and then before him, in the doorway, was a skeletal being, covered in grey cloth faded to the same hue as its decaying skin. It seemed to have no face, the nostrils elongated, and the rest of the face covered up in strips of fabric as if it was bandaged. Its hair seemed to be made up of either wispy spiderwebs or just to be the most silver thinning hair he had ever seen. But what surprised him the most was that the bean, that foul bean, was holding something that was so contrary to the entire thing. It was a plate of fried chicken. Not just any. The homemade kind on dainty porcelain plate, golden browns with the flecks of freshly ground pepper. Jack couldn't help but feel he was being offered the chicken out to him, but he didn't want to stay long enough to give a food review. Grabbing the plate and whipping around to scramble down the stairs in a panicked run, the sounds of bones cracking, it would stay with Jack forever. That bean made noise that perhaps could be speech, but he couldn't understand it. It was too soft, too cursed. He could see the thing retreating as he reached the bike and straddled the barrage carrier. He held onto the plate securely, unwilling to give up his prize for some reason. Perhaps he was just hungry. Go, go, go! He cried out, and Nicholas did not falter. The boy kicked the kickstand and then smashed the pedals. They barreled down the road, back towards the centre of town. The cold was now long forgotten as his jacket flapped open, E.T. almost flying off with the speed they were going. And that is how a group of trick-or-treaters was found running, cycling, and screaming, but with arguably some of the best fried chicken any of them had ever tasted in their short, pimply lives.